Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Giacomini in Golden, Colorado, and I wanted to take just a couple of minutes of your time today and give you a different perspective on some of the factors that we need to consider when we're talking about racism. And a lot of folks will think that the only thing you can talk about is one aspect of it, and I don't believe that. I believe we need to take a systems approach to this. And that's what I want to talk about today. So there are a number of factors that are included in any topic that we talk to or talk about, especially when we're discussing something as critical as a societal issue like racism. But before we get started, I have a lot of prejudices. And anytime, especially if you're an academic, you're writing any type of paper, you'll always include what are your prejudices? What is your background? Because people need to understand that. So I'm going to give you my worldview first so you understand where my prejudices are coming from. So, first, I grew up in a very poor neighborhood on the banks of the Hudson River, just south of Albany, New York. In my community, there was a common denominator, and that was we were all poor. You were either white and poor or black and poor, but we were all poor. And that's the way we grew up. My dad never went to high school. His father died when he was in eighth grade and then went to work to help feed his family. My mom never finished high school. I'm the first one in the family to get a college education, at least for my mom and dad's family. And same with my generation amongst all of my cousins. We primarily were the ones that were the first generation to get a college education. But I've always been a dreamer and I never had a victim mentality. And I knew it was up to me to have some hard work, persistence, and I did that. And over the years, I became an officer and a pilot in the United States Air Force. I spent 26 years there. Absolutely loved it, but stopped having fun at 26 years, and then I got out. During the course of that time, I obtained my black belt in karate, jujitsu, um, studied judo, tai chi. So I've got a different background or different mentality just from that and the discipline I learned. I also obtained multiple advanced degrees, including my PhD. And what I tell people with that is 25 cents, my degrees won't buy you a cup of coffee. All right. But I still learned a lot in the process. I consider myself a patriot. I'm a constitutional conservative. I'm a Roman Catholic Christian. Doesn't mean I'm not a sinner, but I'm still a Roman Catholic Christian, and that has formed my worldview too. I'm married. I have three daughters. I have two grandchildren, and I have one little man, a grandson. And now that I have left the military, I then went into the intelligence community, spent a decade at the National Counterterrorism Center in Northern Virginia. But I'm always been a dreamer. That's how I became a pilot. That's how I got into the intelligence community. And now my dream is to be an entrepreneur, which I am. And that also colors my perspective of racism or anything else that we're going to discuss. So I'll show you what I'm doing as an entrepreneur. First, I'm a dream life coach and a dream life leadership coach because I believe everybody has greatness inside of them. Everybody has a passion waiting to be uncovered. Everybody's been given a gift by God. And my role and goal there is helping clients live the life of their dreams. At the same time, I'm also an insurance agent because I help protect people's dreams. And right now, I'm working with teachers from K to 12 as a retirement expert, helping them retire with the income they need, they deserve. And the combination of those two are fulfilling my dream of becoming an entrepreneur. And as we move into our discussion of racism, I want to talk about the human body, and you're going to wonder, what in the world are you talking about? Well, I want to talk about a systems approach to looking at any societal issue. And the easiest way to understand that is taking a look at the systems within our human bodies. First, we are comprised of mental, emotional, spiritual, physical bodies. If we're mentally anguished, emotionally distressed, it can impact us physically. If we're physically hurt, it can impact us mentally and emotionally. That's very easy to understand, of course. And then there are multiple systems, and I'm not going to go into these charts, but just to give you an idea, there's multiple systems. You've got the nervous, the cardiovascular, et cetera. Take a look at uh, the toilet in the lower left. If our bowels get stopped up, every system shuts down and gets impacted. And that's just a very crude example of when you look at something, you got to look at all aspects of it. And we may not even know all aspects of our system. And the human body is a good example because in around 1996, 1997, researchers discovered the endocannabinoid system, which is an entirely new system that many physicians and nurses and other medical professions know nothing about because only the last time I looked, only about 3% of medical schools in the United States are even teaching anything about it. But the bottom line, for the human body, we have to take a look at it from a holistic perspective because an impact to one system hits other systems. And what I'm talking about here is taking a critical thinking approach. And again, I'm not going to go over these charts. These are from the Foundation for Critical Thinking, I believe is where I got them. But we have to look at all of the factors that are impacting racism. And that includes the political dimension. We cannot divorce politics from the racism discussion because they're so intertwined in our American system, in any country's system. I would recommend that you check out the Foundation for Critical Thinking, and I put the link here in the slides. And the quote below is from them. And I knew about this when I was teaching at the Air Force Academy and teaching critical thinking, that from the research that has been done in the past, critical thinking is not being taught effectively in the schools at high school level or below, at college level or university level. But it can be done, but it's not being done. Kids aren't being taught how to think anymore in college. They're being taught what to think, just like you and I, with the politically correct culture, have been taught what to think, not how to think, what to say, not us determine, what we're, how we're going to say things. So critical thinking is a very, very important aspect of looking at any particular issue. And then we need to think about it then from that aspect, what other factors do we need to include when we discuss racism? So I am going to suggest here are a few. This is not an all-inclusive list by any means. You can see what I've got there from economic through educational, health, and employment. There are other factors as well too, but I think this is enough to give everyone an idea that when we're discussing racism, we have to look at a number of factors. For instance, as I'm looking at this, historical is not on there. We need to look at the history of this country, the history of racism, the history of Western civilization, etc. That also impacts it. But as I said, this is not an all-inclusive list. But given my worldview, given my prejudices, given my experiences and who I am as a man in 2020, these are my thoughts. These are not the total answer. These are just my thoughts. Will get people thinking. So the first thing is, I do want to mention too, if you stick to the end, I am going to give a thought, a suggestion that could significantly mitigate, if not eliminate, racism in the United States and throughout the world. I'm a dreamer, remember, and when you see it, you'll understand. All right, so here are my thoughts. Is there institutional racism in the police, law enforcement? And I state emphatically the answer is no. Absolutely not. Now, I spent 26 years in the Air Force. My last couple of years, I spent as a trained security forces officer. I worked side by side with the El Paso County, Colorado Sheriff's Department when we worked football games at the academy. When I was studying jiu-jitsu, one of my best friends in jiu-jitsu was a member of the Colorado Springs SWAT team. He was a black gentleman, a jiu-jitsu martial artist, and we used to practice together. And I can state emphatically from my experience, there is no institutional racism within law enforcement in the United States today. In the 1960s, there was. We've come a long way since then, since the time of segregation, when the Democrats and the police departments were fighting tooth and nail to stop the integration, but it doesn't exist today. But having said that, from my worldview, are there bad cops? Yes. Are there racist cops? Yes. Are there bad black people? Yes. Are there bad white people? Yes. Are there racist blacks, racist whites? Yes. And Asians, and you name it. Give me any group. We're going to find bad people in it. We're going to find racist people in it. But that does not make institutional racism in law enforcement. That's my worldview. But when you look at institutional, and that's just one of the aspects I'm looking at here on the racism issue, let's take a look at health. I'm not going to go into a discussion, a diatribe in each one of these, but just to give you an example, the health issue tied to racism is also tied to employment, educational, economic factors, and others as well. So that's something to consider. So this is not necessarily an easy discussion where you can just find the answer just looking at one thing. Employment. Employment's tied to educational issues. It's tied to economic. It's tied to institutional. And I'm going to come back to that as far as the institutional, because there is an institution that I maintain is institutionally racist, and they have a plantation domination ideology. And I'm going to talk about that when we get to the political. And of course, the political is tied and overshadows all of these things because the political influences all of these. Economic, that's tied to political, economic issues. Did you know that the poorest communities in the top 20 of the most violent U.S. cities are controlled by Democrats? It's also tied to educational and the welfare state. Legal's influenced by all these factors. I'm going to pull in based on what's happening today with the rioting going on across the country. The rule of law is ignored by one of our major political parties. And oh, by the way, I am not a Republican. I hate both parties. I'm an independent. I think both parties should be destroyed and start new. I think we need a constitutional conservative party. But right now, the rule of law is being ignored by the Democratic Party and to an extent by the Republican Party through their silence. Educational is tied to the economic, political, employment, and health. Let me give you one example how educational is tied to politics. We know that some of the worst schools are in some of the poorest communities in these Democratic mayor-controlled cities. What wonders could we achieve if we allowed the students in the children in those cities to have a choice of where they go to school? Hence the school voucher program, which our current president is for, but the Democrats are blocking. Why are they blocking that? I think you need to, and I need to really think about that, because one simple stroke of the pen, if they agree with it, and these two numbnut parties, Democrats and Republicans, can get together and agree and offer school choice, then these children in the poorest communities, many of whom are black and other minorities, could attend the school of their choice and get a better education and have a better life, have a better job, have better health, have better legal representation. get a better life for their kids and their grandchildren. But no, politically, we have one party stopping that potential progress to help our inner city youth. Now let's take a look at political and why we have to include political in everything that we discuss, all right? First, it overshadows and it influences every single issue that I've listed. It influences the historical that I didn't list and all the other factors that you might want to discuss. I already mentioned how Democrats block the school choice issue, which would automatically overnight have one little positive impact on decreasing racism. We need to look at the historical aspect. Democrats have historically supported slavery, they supported the KKK, and they supported the welfare state. And I would argue, from my prejudice, from my experiences, from what I've seen, there is institutional racism and it exists in the Democratic Party. When I was a young boy, I watched the Democrats fight tooth and nail against integration and maintaining segregation. And they lost that battle. It was a long, hard fight. I watched Martin Luther King do his marches. I was too young to join him, but I watched him on black and white television. The Democrats are the one who have always supported slavery. They didn't want Abraham Lincoln to be reelected in 1864. That was the second most seminal election in the history of the United States. They fought that tooth and nail, just like they're fighting our current president. And this institutional racism within the Democratic Party is stemming from what I have coined doing this presentation is a plantation domination ideology to force the welfare state onto our poorer communities and keep them suppressed. That's just not my idea. I've heard many black commentators say the exact same thing. And if we go back up to the institutional issue on no institutional racism in police, I will not necessarily quote, but state very similar views from an American civil rights lawyer who happens to have black skin. I even hate to use that as a description to a person because that's not the way I look at him. He's 3 years younger than I am. He has spent his life litigating against police brutality over the last 20 years. So he has a very unique perspective of police brutality and institutional racism within law enforcement. And he states emphatically there is no institutional racism within the police departments. This is all a false narrative, my brothers and sisters. It's all a false narrative. There are racist cops, yeah, and we need to root them out, yeah. There are bad cops, yeah. And do you know that with all of this that has gone on with the race riots, and I don't even know if they're race riots because the peaceful protests are being overshadowed by our domestic terrorist group that's an arm of the Democratic Party, and that's Antifa, and the violent portion of the Black Lives Matter movement. They're just using a false narrative to get what they want. Another brother in arms of mine, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, U.S. Army retired, former congressman, feels the same way. He also feels the Democrats are suppressing black people, black minorities and other minorities in the United States. So these are not just my ideas. And also, as far as the Black Lives Matter movement goes, and I'm talking about the movement, not necessarily individuals, supporting the movement, but the movement itself overall is a violent Marxist movement, and they do not care about black lives. If they cared about black lives, they would be protesting and marching against the number one killer of black men. And that's black on black killings, but they don't say a word. They would also be marching and protesting against the black police officers that have been killed over these last few weeks from the rioting, but they don't care about them. No. They would also be protesting and marching against probably the most open genocidal institution, which is institutionally racist and killing tens of thousands of black babies a year, and that's Planned Parenthood. So, ladies and gentlemen, do not tell me that there is institutional racism in the police departments, because it doesn't exist. But there is institutional racism in Planned Parenthood. There is institutional racism in the Democratic Party with their plantation domination ideology. And I'm even going to go one step further. There is institutional racism in Black Lives Matter movement, because they don't give a damn about Black lives. They are shaking down politicians. They are shaking down businesses. How many hundreds of millions of dollars have they got in their coffers over the last few weeks from what they've been doing? No. There's no institutional racism in the police department. And politics has to be considered in all of this. Because if you divorce politics from the concept of racism and how to fix it, you're going to miss one of the major portions. As you can tell, I feel very passionate about this. But I also have an idea how we can fix it. This is I've always said in my coaching, my mentoring, and all the leadership positions I've had throughout the years when I've been talking with others, there is elegance in simplicity. And I'm going to give you a very simple solution. But it is going to be so extremely difficult. And how can we reduce it? And that is, first, understand individuals, not institutions, but individuals, which make up the institution. We're racist because we don't know who we are. We see others as different from us. Like I said earlier, I started to describe Lieutenant Colonel Allen West as a Black man, or Leo Terrell, the American civil rights lawyer, as a Black man. And I hate that. I hate that. His skin happens to be black. Mine happens to be white. Doesn't mean we're different, but we see others as different. We don't know who we are. We don't know ourselves. And because we don't know who we are, we identify ourselves as what we do. Maybe the color of our skin, or we identify what we look like, man, woman, etc. But if we know who we are, we will see others as equal. Nobody is better than each of us. Nobody is worse. We are all children of the one true God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's our identity. We are sons and daughters of God. And if we've been baptized through a Trinitarian baptism, we have been adopted into his royal family as princes and princesses. That's our identity. And God is all races. We are all made in the image of God. And we are all brothers and sisters. So, for those of you whom I've never met or who do not know me, you are not a stranger to me. You are simply a brother and sister, a friend whom I have yet to meet. Just imagine if we adopted that attitude with people. I don't care who you are. I don't care what the color of your skin is, or your ethnicity. God made all of us in his image. And if we remember that, we can reduce racism in our own attitude, and then institutionally as well too. Here's a picture I have hanging on the wall of my house. This picture does not do it justice, but it's about 4+ feet tall, 2.5, almost 3 feet wide. And this is a picture of the Divine Mercy as Saint Faustina saw Jesus when he appeared to her. And you can read her diary, which I highly recommend. He did ask her to paint a portrait, and she did. And she showed Jesus this picture, and he approved of it. But notice Jesus's skin is white. Does that mean Jesus was white? Of course not. Well, that's the dumbest thing I heard. We know he was born in the Middle East. We know he had olive colored skin, dark skin. But Jesus and God is all races. And he appears to people as they are. So he appeared to St. Faustina in white skin. I know God allows the Virgin Mary to appear to people throughout the world. She has stated to people, I don't know if it was in Vietnam where she appeared with Vietnamese features or in Africa where she appeared with black skin, but she specifically told the visionaries that she appears to them as they are, because we're all the same. We were made by God, so God is all races. So depictions of a white Jesus are not racist. And let's not fall in to the groupthink mentality. Let's do our critical thinking. Let's look at all aspects of racism, every aspect, and it all has to be discussed. But do it with intellectual integrity, do it with honesty, do it with respect, and do it with love. And I leave you with these few words. If you think there's anything in this video that is worth sharing, then please share it widely. Hopefully, it could convince, I will be successful if one person, just one person, listens to what I say seriously and says, you know, he's right. We need to look at all these factors. I'm not saying my opinion is right, because my opinion is prejudice. I told you what my prejudices are based on my worldview. But boy, if we all came together from a critical thinking perspective with love and integrity and honesty, not political pandering, boy, how this country could change. So I leave you with this. Remember, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're born into poverty. If you're born into wealth, you are a child of God. That's your identity. That's my identity. You are a child of God, the one true God. And I ask you to remember that. And you have greatness inside of you. There are dreams inside of you waiting to explode, but all you have to do is find them. That's why I'm a dream life coach, to help people do that. I firmly believe that. The one thing, Mr. Les Brown, who also, if you know him, happens to be a black man, grew up in the worst poverty, worst circumstances, now world renowned. He told a story, and I'd like you to think about this story. If you want to, close your eyes for a moment. But he told the story about a man on his deathbed. And the ghost of dreams unfulfilled came to him on his deathbed. And the dreams talked to him, and he asked, the dying man asked the angels, why? Why are you dying too? And the unfulfilled dreams said to the man, the dreams that you had inside of you were given to you by God and nobody else on this earth. And we are dying with you. When I heard that, it struck me like a locomotive going 100 miles an hour. And that's why I'm still working, because I still have unfulfilled dreams. And that's why I firmly believe that every human being on this earth, everyone, has unfulfilled dreams, and we're all the same, and God made us all alike to succeed. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. May God bless your family, your children, your grandchildren. And I ask you to pray for this country. Not just pray, but pray for the people you hate. If you're a Democrat, pray for Trump. If you're a Republican, pray for Biden. If you're black, pray for whites. Whites pray for blacks. Not saying we hate each other, but people see each other as different. Whomever you dislike, pray for. And together we can, I was going to say it, make this country great again. That's not a political advertisement for Trump, although I will tell you that's another bias. I think he's the best of the two choices that we have right now. So I'm going to say make America great again, because right now we're not too great. Right now we're bleeding and we're hurting because of false narratives, because we're not looking critically and using critical thinking at all aspects of racism. And that was the whole purpose of this small talk. God bless. Please share this if you think this is worthwhile.